interview session. So
Okay.
our first question in this regard will be, sir, that Russia's military resources far outweighed Ukraine in the beginning of this war. What, according to you, has helped Ukraine change the tide of this war over the time?
Okay, that's an interesting question, because when the war started in February 2022, everyone hoped, including we all analysts, that Russia will be able to achieve its aim in a very, very short time frame, given the relative difference in their force levels and the asymmetries existing between both the countries. However, that did not happen. If you recall, initially Russia had encircled Ukraine from three directions: from the north, from the east, and the south. But all that had happened long time before this war actually got launched. So from November 21 onwards, Ukraine was reasonably sure that the possibility of war is very much there on the cards, and therefore the gap between November 21 and February 22 gave them preparatory time to a large extent to take care of some of their concerns for the defensive battle. So that was one advantage which was in favor of Ukraine. Second, if you really see that the USA and the West, they started giving tremendous amount of support in Ukraine. They gave Ukraine substantial support in terms of psychological warfare. The rest of the world was not actually knowing what was happening. Predominantly, the Western media was hyping the gains by the Ukrainian forces and losses by the Russian forces. Whereas, it was not really that much the case that it was, made out to be. However, the world believed that the Ukrainians are moving in the right direction, and that also helped them to actually enhance their morale, the morale of the soldiers and the people there, that they can turn the tide, which ultimately appears to be on the cards, but it is also too premature to predict that finality as it. To my mind, actually, the change which has come, it is not because of the Ukraine's positive attempt and outcome. It is primarily because of the failures of Russian effort. You would be alarmed to see the kind of air force and air superiority Russians had, but they did not use that to the desired level. Even their missile and rocket power and other things, which they could have used, in a big way in the initial stages of war, they did not do that. They chose the terrain which was not suited for the tank battles, and went into the modality of conduct of operations which are outdated, of the First World War and Second World War vintage, wherein 70 to 80 kilometers long tank trails are moving when they were initially approaching towards Kiev from the northern side. So the war has actually moved in a way, basically taking advantage of Russia's failure, which has ultimately become the Ukraine's advantage. However, it will not be correct to bring certain important facets of the Ukrainians. There, the leadership displayed by Mr. Zelensky, their president, and the people in general, despite having all the kind of sufferings, the whole country was together to fight this out, and that made a lot of difference. And last but not the least, I think though Russia had the superior military equipment, but that famous saying, it is the man behind the machine which matters. I think their soldiers, they were not adequately trained, and the trained component of manpower was not substantial. Subsequently, they landed in a situation that they had to seek for drafts and reserves to be drafted, and ultimately in number of cases which happened that they left their equipment and they surrendered and things like that. And it is in nutshell which has turned the things, at least if not finally, temporarily in favor of Ukraine.
Great analysis, sir. So this brings us to a second question, that as a military tactical viewpoint, which is forever evolving, what are your observations from this war? Like, can our establishment and the military learn anything from either of the sides?
Absolutely. In fact, this war has become an eye-opener, not only for India, but large number of countries in the world. What had preceded this war, the battles indicated that the wars are going to be short and swift, and therefore countries were, focusing more on capability development in terms of having high precision, long range weapons, but lesser duration wars. Now that is something which has, to be taken note of. The war has already moved into the ninth month, and there is no surety as to when it is going to terminate or stabilize. And all this has happened when the war is being fought in a plain terrain largely. As against that, if you see the India's terrain with China, which is our primary adversary, the majority of the terrain is mountainous, high altitude, inaccessible, and difficult area. So if the wars can prolong that much in the plain areas, you can well imagine as to how the prolonged war can take place between India and China. I will not talk of Pakistan because it has lost relevance as a actually opposing country to my personal viewpoint. So India has also to realign its strategy, be ready for long drawn wars if it happens with China, and therefore the kind of equipment it has to have, the kind of indigenous ability to produce and supplementary in case of the damages to the equipment, in terms of the ammunition stocking period it has to look at, in terms of the logistics build-up which it has to taken care of. So all these things are one of the important lessons. Secondly, if you really see, uh, the superiority of forces is important. Like, Russia had the superiority of forces in all domains. There was no match between the two countries. But the superiority of force alone doesn't make a difference. It is also important that there has to be national resolve to use that superiority to its advantage. I will not go back to 1962 as to why we did not use our power. That is in any case matter of past. But if you just see in Russia-Ukraine war, Russia did not use its superior air power in this battle initially. It also selected the targets wherein it did not focus on a large-scale destruction of the human beings, the cities, and the civic infrastructure to a very large extent in the rest of the Ukraine, leave aside in the southern and the eastern region. And probably, as a country, he was thinking that Ukraine will fall very fast, and therefore there is no need to carry out infrastructure destruction, because subsequently if it falls, then either it has to be supported by Russian for its rebuild up or by the next government which comes in power. However, with that not happening at whatever time they would have understood this, there was a need to recalibrate this strategy. But I think, we don't know what is there in the Russian mind, but as an observer, I feel their aim and there is one important principle of war, and that is maintenance of aim. So what was the aim and whether that has been maintained throughout, that is also a $1,000,000 question. And therefore, in Indo and Chinese India-Chinese conflict, whatever be the our national aim, we must be able to maintain that throughout the conflict. And the third aspect, though the lessons are very many, I will not touch each one of them because of the shortage of time. But another important thing is as to how this psychological warfare has been utilized by the Western countries who have supported Ukraine, and the social media uses, the articles which have been written in the so-called credible journals and organizations. So I think Indian approach has also to factor these things in reality, so that if we cannot be on the ahead of the cycle of Chinese in this particular domain, at least we are not negated, and the adversities of Chinese are also brought out, so that the people there also know what we have done. So these are three lessons which I have just highlighted. But there are very many lessons, and the people who matter, they are taking a note of this particular war in a big way.
Absolutely, sir. Great observations, I must say. This brings us to the third question. And in the war, there are many decisions which are taken by the military commanders. What, according to you, has prompted Moscow to announce its withdrawal from the Kherson city?
Well, actually, it came as a surprise to many countries in the world and also to the defense watchers, because Kherson was one of the important towns which Russia had captured, and that too in the initial stages. It was a important sea port linkage, and also it was a gateway to the Crimea, which they had annexed in 2014. However, under geographical location, if you see Kherson, it is on west of Dnipro River. And since Russia had started facing adversities in past, I think 15 to 20 days on various fronts in various measures, I think it is a tactically taken decision to give a strategic pause, wherein they have vacated Kherson and moved east of the Dnipro River. And while moving that, there are two prominent bridges there in the area opposite Kherson. Both them have been reasonably destroyed. While Ukraine is happy that since they have destroyed the bridge, it will not be easy for them also to now relaunch offensive and capture, because if they have to get across the river, they have to be also crossing means, and the moment you create crossing means, it is susceptible to the air and missile strikes, and also it can be contested by the fighting troops. Russia feels that since they are now on the eastern bank of the river will act as an important obstacle, and they will be able to hold on to their gains so far, consolidate them. And since we are already in the month of November, from November to February, March, these are going to be crucial winter months, and therefore the European countries which are highly dependent on Russia for their energy supply, they are also going to suffer astronomically on the economic front, also on the inflationary front also. So there may be the current fabric of the European countries may further get broken. The support to Ukraine may decrease. And another thing which is contributing to Ukraine's economy is the grain export. Even that, in spite of the initial agreement where they had allowed each other to export the grains, because both are earning money from that, so even that has been blocked. So with that strategic pause and consolidating of position, I for one feel probably this is a calculated move, and they will like to see the reduction of support for Ukraine from the European countries and further tax the economy of Ukraine and their supporters.
Great, sir. So this is into the continuation of the previous question. What, according to you, can be now the agenda of the Ukrainian army after this recent Russian retreat?
Well, if you really see, there were murmurs of diplomatic and political negotiations to resolve the matter, which will again I'll speak as if there is a pertinent question as you go ahead. But the bottom line is that Ukraine has been claiming to get back anything and everything whatever it was having prior to launch of this operation on 24th February 2022. Now for that to happen, it has, if it is not vacated by Russia, so it is attempting in the bits and pieces to capture those territories. So it will continue to advance eastwards and then turn towards southwards, so that these two regions which have gone back to Russia, now part of the Russian Federation because of that so-called plebiscite or the referendum, whatever you wish to say, so that it can take them back. However, it will require a lot of resistance, a lot of time. Whether it will happen or not happen, that is also a matter of question. But that is the aim of Ukraine, to keep limiting the gains of Russia and keep incrementally, even if not out of the way, to enhance its aim. And the moment they go across Dnipro River and start capturing certain things, then seeing the disparity of host level and the level of countries standing in the world level between Russia and Ukraine, even a minor game by Ukraine is going to speak volumes about that country as against Russia, because it is now going to oppose a very strong country, so to say.
Absolutely. And so there is one very interesting aspect of this war. Like Kherson city is located very close to the Crimean Peninsula, which the Russia annexed in 2014. So do you see that there is a possibility that Ukraine can put forward a military campaign to even reclaim the Crimean Peninsula?
Well, that is very interesting issue. As I told you in my previous response, that Kherson is gateway to Crimea. Now, Crimea has already been taken by Russia way back in 2014, as you have also highlighted. While their current interest lies to get those areas vacated, which is actually in the eastern and southern region, and not go for Crimea. But since the entire Crimea, which was part of Ukraine prior to 2014 and has now a linkage in a big way, even to release pressure on the areas on east side of Dnieper River, it will be a strategic brilliance if they enter Crimea, because the degree of fighting which they are going to face in Crimea, to my mind, is going to be lesser as compared to what they are going to face after crossing the Dnieper River and this thing. And maybe once they move in that direction, they may put some kind of pressure either to get their more areas east of Dnieper River, or that can also force Russia to come on the negotiating table on a more acceptable formula from both the sides. So militarily and tactically, I will not say it is not impossible, but less likely, of course. But if they do that, to my mind, it will be a brilliant move.
Absolutely, sir. So, do you think that this war has now entered a phase wherein diplomatic solution can be on the cards, sir?
Absolutely. In fact, if you really observe Mr. Zelensky, he has been saying that people must persuade Russia to enter into the credible dialogue. And what is exactly the bottom line of Russia, that Russia has also not stated, in real sense, except the initial points, which were prevalent before the war started, of Ukraine not joining the NATO and the NATO not expanding the further eastwards. But that has become irrelevant now. Now the diplomatic resolution is needed between Russia and Ukraine. The other things can be a peripheral issue, so to say. However, for any diplomatic move to be successful, there are two things which are needed, rather three things which are needed. One is that both the countries should be willing to come to the diplomatic negotiation. I think willy-nilly on this count, both of them are not openly opposing that. So on this ground, I think if balanced two conditions are met, this condition will automatically get fulfilled. They will both negotiate. Second, they want somebody who appears neutral and friendly to both. That person can negotiate, or that country can negotiate. To that extent, there is a lot of expectation from India. In fact, the Indian Prime Minister, when he had gone for SCO summit, he told Mr. Putin very categorically that this is not the era of war, and we must return to diplomacy and the political dialogue. And recently the visit of our External Affairs Minister did take place to Russia. So and even Mr. Zelensky and his foreign minister have appealed to the Indians to actually mediate. Seeing the inter-state relations between India and Russia and India and Ukraine, I think that's a good case for India to step in more aggressively to trying to resolve this dispute, and that will be bringing India to actually a different level of international stature. So this was second, a country. So India is existing. Whether it finally is able to do or not, that will depend now on the third component. And third component is the bottom line, on which you feel that the both countries will have honorable exit, and they can tell their people that both of them have won, really speaking. Now the demand of Zelensky that Russia should go back out of their country prior to February 22 line, and also vacate Crimea, that is no go. Similarly, for Russia also to vacate these things, then agree for what? After losing so much of manpower, resource, all that kind. But to me, there is a silver lining, and that silver line is that 2014 Crimea issue, that cannot be brought into the dispute now at this juncture for negotiation. The current negotiation must get limited to whatever has happened on eastern of the Dnieper River, which are physically under control of the Russian forces. Now, these areas, if you really see from 2014 onwards, and even little prior to that, the Donetsk and Luhansk regions, they were part of a kind of autonomous regions, though they were not given the recognition by certain countries, but they were a kind of the independent countries. Only thing now what has happened, that the referendum has taken place, and they have joined. Initially the leaders of both the countries invited Russia, so Russia got the international justification to enter, and now after referendum, whatever be its worth, they have become part of Russia, so Russia is within their rights to defend and use any means to further the aim. But I think the bottom line between both the countries could be, as against Russia vacating, what could be done that these two countries which have become two regions which have become part of Russia, they become independent nations. So, and that was a kind of a lose-lose state even prior to February 2022, which there were line of control which was existing, and near autonomy was existing to these regions. So Ukraine should not also have an issue until the time Russia moves out of that, and these are given independence as a separate country and not part of the Russians. I think that should be also an honorable exit for Ukraine. So this or anything related to that, if that bottom line which is acceptable to both the countries, if that can be found out, and then the diplomatic options can be negotiated, there is a hope that in coming days something better may happen as against the continuance of war. We all hope that way.
Absolutely. We have discussed this war in detail in all the previous questions, sir. But there is one thing which I like to bring the attention to, and that is that what, according to you, will be the overall implication of this whole war and whatever course it may take in future for the Europe, for the continent of Europe.
Okay, actually, this is very, very important. Apparently this is a fight between Russia and Ukraine, but actually it is not so. The entire Europe has been made scapegoat by United States of America in their master stroke. There was a time when Europe was considering to take care of their own security for the external threats and outside the NATO umbrella. They were not very keen and happy that they continue to be dependent on USA for their security and the being part of NATO, because NATO not only is the security organization, large number of USA troops and even nuclear missiles are kept in these countries which are part of NATO, besides those countries also having the participating troops. However, before that could mature, this thing has come now. The situation has been created where the Europe has become hostage to USA for their security needs for time to come, and at least there will be decades and decades before the any other alternative is found. And second issue, there are actually three clear-cut losers in this war, and these are Russia, Ukraine, and the Europe as a whole. As far as the rest of the world is concerned, they are not the losers, but they are all countries are sufferers. This war is having negative impact on each and every country, including India. So that way, rest of the entire countries are suffering, but the maximum suffering is to Europe. And why this suffering? There is energy crisis. You would be aware that the temperatures in the winters are sub-zero in number of European countries. They were heavily dependent on the energy supply from Russia. Now that Nord Stream 2 is out, Nord Stream 1 there was a damage, and part of the supplies are coming, and even that is blocked. So on one hand, the cost of the energy, though it is available in the alternate market from USA and Saudi Arabia and Gulf countries, but the cost of that energy is pretty high. The kind of inflationary levels which have been seen in Europe were never seen actually in history earlier. So there is an energy crisis. Then there is a grain crisis also. Because these were dependent on the supplies from Ukraine and the Russia and number of other countries which have linkages with the both. Even that is suffering in a substantial manner, though not has become a region of main crisis as is the crisis of the energy. And third, I think there is a cohesion crisis you be seeing now, and which will be more predominant in times to come. Individual countries have started moving out of the sanctions regime of USA and the West and taking independent decisions, because every country is worried for its own economy, for the good of its own people. So as winter approaches and they go through the winter, you may find that the cohesion of the European countries, which is prevalent now, that fabric may be broken, and probably that is what Russia is taking a calculated move. Hopefully it is move and not a forced decision to go on eastern side of Dnieper, take a strategic pause and let these things happen, so that without fighting the war it can achieve something substantial. So really speaking, whatever is happening to Europe because of this war, majority of the European countries will fade away in days to come. Not only related to this war, you would have known that now India has already become the fifth largest economy, surpassing UK in the Europe. Now, as per the IMF predictions, by 2027, it will overtake Germany and Japan to become the third largest economy after USA and China. So with once that happens, you'll be, even economy wise, you'll hardly finding anything worthwhile in Europe. So Europe is undergoing to be under a serious problem unless they take corrective measures and some good sense prevails. If they continue to remain exploited and play on the game as per the chessboard set by USA, they are going to have a lot of drubbing and beating.
Interesting observation, sir. There is one other aspect of this war, and that is that a lot has been covered, observed, and even speculated about China-Russia no limits partnership, as they say it. How serious do you think China is of walking the talk in this whole no limits partnership?
Okay, all those people who are watching China closely, I am started looking at China more carefully in the recent past. But those even who have been seeing China, China is an opportunist country. It has no concept of the real friend or real adversary. It will become friendly uh, to any country which serves their agenda. So since after the Trump administration, USA has taken a negative stance opposite China, and therefore, in the current crisis, the stance of Trump was continued by Biden also in the relationship matrix. So currently, because of that, the alignment of China, Russia, and Russian, presence in the Olympics game, the selecting of date of the launch of Ukrainian operations after that game gets over. So all that were reflective, and this no limit partnership statement was made. But I think how much China is going to play ball with Russia will depend as to how its own relationship is going to shape with USA. The relations are going up and down, but there are also certain acts of hope. So if China and US, the current animosity gets reduced, China will move out of its comfort zone from Russia. However, if the this opposition continues, the proximity of Russia China will continue to grow. So that is all which can be said about this at the current timings, how the whole thing is going to unfold.
Absolutely, absolutely. And according to your observation, sir, China is quite opportunistic, and we also feel the same. And do you see that the world in the leadership of USA will now take a proactive approach in dealing with the threat coming from the Chinese Communist Party? What is your take on this issue, sir?
Well, actually, if you really analyze the history, I will not say you go back too much in time, but even in the 100, 200 years, the Russians and West have been the biggest hypocrites, really speaking. They have nitpicked the logic to justify their actions and not have been universally common in their approach. That okay, if you are opposing a country because of a reason, so if that same reason exists with other countries, that they will definitely oppose other. That is not the case. So while in case of Ukraine, USA came in a big way, really speaking, in terms of the sanctions regime, in terms of risk, in terms of the mobilizing the European countries. And the best part was Europeans could not see the USA's game plan, and they got actually they became the biggest loser. Uh, but that kind of stance is not going to take place with China, really speaking, and there are definite reasons for that. Now, while the issue of Ukraine-Russia conflict could be an international issue and may have the strategic ramifications for Russia and European countries, but the Chinese relationship is in a different matrix. If you really see, even in the Indian context, when April-May 20, it made ingress in number of areas in Eastern Ladakh, and thereafter there was a whole hue and cry at the national level. Government also made certain moves that no, we should not be utilizing Chinese items and Chinese resources for our growth, because it is we indirectly funding China's war on us because of the deficit which we have of the trade deficit with China. It is more favorable to China. But if you see the statistics, despite that kind of stance happening, despite that kind of so-called national appeal or all kind of thoughts, every passing quarter or every passing financial year, the trade with China in the conflict stage has further increased. And not only it has increased, the quantum of trade deficit has also increased, being against India and more favorable to China. Similarly, the Chinese economy had grown up in a manner that they are enmeshed in the international supply chain process so intimately that to take out China immediately is not possible. It will take time because all the countries have to have some kind of inherent capability. Capability creation takes time, and even for alternative supply chain management, there has to be options to be generated in terms of economy, in terms of manpower, in terms of relocation of factories and the production facilities. So I feel that is the reason where the kind of thrust which came against Russia and Ukraine context, that kind of approach, even if the other countries desire, that may not manifest on ground in case of China that easily. Of course, if it is done on a sustained basis, everything is possible.
Good observation, sir. This brings us to the very last question, and that is that do you see that India can be a mediator between the current European crisis of this war between Russia and Ukraine? Because we have seen that Indian administration, they have been in touch with Ukraine, they have been in touch with the Russian administration as well. Do you think that it's possible that India acts as a major mediator between these two warring nations?
I think I have touched this issue in some bit when we talked of the diplomatic relations, whether they can take off at this stage or not. And I talked of, there is a need of a mediator which is equally friendly to both the sides. To that extent, if I want to answer this in brief, India can play that role. But because it has not only good relations with Russia and Ukraine, it also has a good relationship with USA and the other European countries as well. because Ukraine is just a front for Ukraine to accept something. The others have to be also coming on board. And on that ground, in the world today, India is best placed to come forward and mediate to resolve. However, it will depend on whether an identified point can be found out, and then India can take that role. But seeing the rising stature of India, seeing the India's relationship with most of these countries involved in this conflict directly and indirectly, India stands best chance in the world to resolve this crisis diplomatically.
Thank you, sir. This brings us to the end of this interview session, and we do hope that all our viewers who have been watching this video must have learned immensely about this whole conflict, along with the added bonuses of understanding about the China